You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
Met nobody like you. Had friends and I've had buddies. It's true, but they don't turn my tummy the way you do. I never met nobody like you.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today, I'm going to go ahead and tap people and tell them they are to introduce themselves. Other Ryan, step up.
Hello, I'm Ryan McCarroll. I am a technical director for the lighting department at Pixar. I've also been a lead technical director for Soul and Bow, but I was a lighting technical director for Turning Red.
Let us slide over to Laura.
I'm Laura Maxwell Scott. I am a talent agent in Austin, Texas. I am a podcast host occasionally coming back. And I think my only real qualifications for being here today are I am a mother and I have been a 13-year-old girl.
Excellent points. Nathan.
I'm Nathan Cohn. I work for Texas Public Radio in San Antonio, where I do a lot of stuff on air and online. And in the community in San Antonio, I host and curate a summer film series called Cinema Tuesdays.
Which is coming back this year.
It is coming back in person live. So we're really excited about that.
I hope you wear a tuxedo t-shirt to the first one to welcome everyone back.
I'll wear something special for you.
I appreciate that. So today we are talking about Turning Red, the latest offering from Pixar. And we've all seen it at least once. And in fact, part of when I was reaching out to some folks to see who wants to talk to Ryan, who else wants to talk to Ryan, I'm not a parent. I have been a 13-year-old, but not a girl. I'm not an Asian American. And so there was a lot of there's a lot of ways to talk about this film, which is one of the fascinating things about it. But Laura, do you have any questions you want? Well, let's first summarize what the movie's about. Let's do that. The movie is essentially about a 13-year-old girl who lives with her parents, with whom she loves, and they also run a temple in Toronto. Okay.
Oh, yes.
And I just had three people nod at me, so I know I'm 75% right. And she has three good friends at school who are kind of her little pack of four, as everyone has when you're about 13 years old in the Stand By Me model. And she realizes one day that she has turned into a 9-foot red panda. And it is a family curse. And her mother very much wants to work with her to there's a way to contain the curse and get rid of it if she can just wait to the next red moon. And, but at the same time, she would very much like to go see Four Town, the boy band. It is all set in 2002, so it all feels very much how all of that felt at that point in the world of boy bands and teen girls. What am I leaving out of the plot, team?
I think you're doing quite well without giving away.
Yeah, without spoiling the end of it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does anybody want to kick off and have questions for Ryan? Well, let's start with Ryan. What did you actually do on this film? Because I know The same director who worked on Bao was the lead director on this.
Yes, I well, because I was a lead on Bao, like I said earlier, and I know Domi, and I know I worked with her pretty closely on that because it's a short, it's a really small crew. So and I actually did some of like the shading, some of the more upstream type stuff. I was working on the look of the food in Bao. Specifically, there's a feast that she prepares for the dumpling son. But but then I did lighting on that as well. And in that time period, I also worked with Rona Liu, the production designer. She went on to be the production designer for Turning Red. So that was a film that I saw coming. I saw Domi's pitch about what the movie was about. I was like, oh yeah, I got to be on this movie, for sure. So I, put up all the flags I could about, hey, please cast me on this movie. There is a casting, I work on kind of a lot of films. It's strange that I've worked on the past 3 films in a row, because before that I had missed some films, because I was busy when I was the lead on Soul, I missed working on Onward. And I think I also missed working on Incredibles 2 because I was working on Bao. But yeah, that would, Turning Red and Luca, and what we call Beta, which is actually Lightyear, were all movies that I really wanted to work on. But because of other responsibilities, I didn't get to be in a lead role on those movies, but it's kind of good because I got to actually work on all of them, which was fun. And as far as lighting stuff that I did on Turning Red, it was really from sort of the middle of lighting production to the sort of crunch time at the end. I worked on, I had basically a big scene to myself that I lit. It was a location, a set, which was May's room that had already been in other parts of the movie. But it was the sort of conversation that Jin, May's dad, has with May. And I'm thinking maybe I haven't asked my director of photography, Jonathan Pitko, if this was the reason, but I'm guessing it was because of my big dad energy that I was cast on this. I also have a little girl. She's not 13, but she's 8. But and I have a 10-year-old boy as well. But yeah, so I ended up working in that set, and I basically did what we call the key lighting, which is setting up the lights. The practical lights, like lamps and stuff, they come in with sort of a starter illumination. Okay, the lamp's turned on in the room, and then we start to enhance it with extra stuff. I ended up using a lot of lights for wrap, to wrap the lights around the characters and make it just really soft and warm, and sort of sort of enhance the warmth and love of this moment. But also, just before I digress too much, also I worked on that, but did all the key lighting and all the shot lighting in that area. Oh, I also, it's connected to it. But I lit a set that had a location or set that had not been lit before, which was the basement, which was kind of Jin's happy place, where it's very messy and there's lots of stuff. But that's where Jin finds the movie camera, the nice early century style movie camera that the kids used to use back in those days. And everybody used to use back in those days, where he finds some of the footage of May, with her friends in full on panda mode, dancing around and stuff like that. And then he discovers that, she's been doing this, and then has his dad to daughter talk with her. So I did all of that stuff, lighting wise. And then then it was like race to the finish time, and the big, we were finishing all the big third act stuff. So don't want to give too much away, but I did some of the stuff in the stadium where there's the mom panda wreaking havoc. So yeah, I guess that is kind of a spoiler.
It's fine. We kind of expect if people show up for the podcast. Yeah. But yeah, there's some like Japanese kaiju inflected moments in there, and I particularly wanted to be involved with that. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, Ryan, you mentioned a scene just now that I really liked in the picture a lot. And that is the dad and daughter talk scene right there. And it goes into something that I really appreciated about this movie. And, it's the script, it's the way the scene is set up. It's, of course, the lighting and the very warmth of it as well, which is that, and I'm going to reference something that a different film critic that I follow on Twitter, Stephen Greydonus, writes about in terms of Disney movies. Going back to like The Little Mermaid or so-ish now, he points to this trend called that he's dubbed Junior Knows Best, where the kids in the Disney movies are basically, showing up the adults all the time, and the adults are presented in general as clueless as to what their children are doing or what their feelings are, what their true path is, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a moment in the film where I think they've kind of, you show that there is a warm relationship between the father and the daughter in this movie. And that really meant something a lot to me, to see that a parent was portrayed with a loving relationship with her daughter in a Disney movie, because that really hasn't been as often, in some of the movies that have come out. Not that, they're not bad movies because of that factor, but it is what it is. But now this is something new and different that hasn't been there in great part for the past 25, 30-ish years or so.
Yeah, I totally get that, understand that sort of trope of the kid knows best. And I think, a lot of the current Pixar films that we're working on now and that you've seen over the past few years, Luca, Onward, they've come from very personal places. Like, we're very, very much pushing the creators, the filmmakers to, tell very personal stories, that have a lot of resonance with them. And I think this Turning Red and Bao actually too sort of comes from that place of Domi's relationship with her own parents, mostly her mother. This is very much about girls and their moms, but I did also love that she had that moment with her dad, and her dad can seem, he does the cooking stuff, and he's sort of like a cooking ninja kind of guy, but then he can also seem kind of clueless and kind of like, oh, what's happening, but yeah, I love that they put in that moment of where he's like, well, I've had some experience with this kind of thing before with your mom, and I get it, and I think it's cute that you're like this with your friends, and it's not.
It shows that he's not clueless. It shows that he's not clueless. It's a beautiful moment, and I just really kudos all around for that moment in the film. And I mean, all together, I love the relationships in the movie, but as the dad, I appreciated that one. And the sometimes cooking dad, I might say.
Sure.
I know that there was a little bit of controversy when the movie came out. It all seemed very manufactured, but nonetheless, it did occur. And I'm a little curious as to, was that discussed, in y'all's Slack or your chat at work, in the days afterward, or are you allowed to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Just obviously, just from my personal point of view, and from like the general point of view of what like Pixar's values are and things like that these days, which have been, repeated from executives talking about Pixar and what Pixar means, what it's all about, what they're trying to do these days is we're trying to tell more diverse stories. We've gotten criticism from certain corners of the industry in the past of not being sort of diverse and being sort of the same, I don't know, like the old boys club in a way, for some of our old films. As amazing as they are, there wasn't a lot of diversity of the voices that were making the films. So that has been a big sort of goal for the company over the past few years of telling stories for more people and having more diverse creators and more women as well, and Domi being a Canadian Asian, am I saying it right? Asian Canadian woman. She's Asian American now, I guess you would say. Is definitely part of that tradition, and she's an amazing voice as far as this goes. But it's also sort of, we're also trying to tell the sort of the personal stories and things like that, and that's sort of those sort of personal moments and personal experiences is something that Domise wanted to show, and she kind of goes there. Like she said, she says in Embrace the Panda, where she wants to like surprise people, and she like in Bao, there's a very shocking moment in Bao, and she said she was kind of, she kind of loved that, so that sort of shock for some audiences seeing that moment. So there are some sort of bold choices and things like that, and she gets into things like puberty and just she barely gets into it. I sort of don't understand some of the parents criticizing the talk about puberty and periods in this movie, because there's not a lot of it, because May is not.
Ryan, they show a box of pads and
Can we back up 1 second? Or when we say we sort of glossed over it, but like, what is the criticism that we're trying to address right now? Is it that a animated film dared talk about periods, or
that was the one that, well, there was essentially like one or two people who came out. I am not talking about the one where the guy said this isn't necessarily relatable. I don't even know if that's worth addressing, and we can't.
Okay. Well, I will just, like, I'm not an immigrant mom, but I mean, I found it very relatable. So
yeah.
Like,
well, and to your point,
nor am I a person from the sea in Italy, but I also found Luca relatable.
Right. Or a rat that cooks, or
no, I'm not a rat that cooks.
A trash robot.
I've never been a plastic toy.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah, that particular one, it may have been even in the Embrace the Panda doc. I can't. Right about the same time I saw the movie, and watched that doc because I watched them within 24 hours of each other. I also heard the phrase, the more specific you make your characters, the more universal they become. Was that in the doc?
It might have been, but I certainly think it's true.
And that was
mentioned. I think that's mentioned in Embrace the Panda, where they actually say like, we're trying to make a very specific movie.
And that's really, and I there's a lot of, I know the theory, and I've talked a little bit on the podcast and other episodes of like the fiction suit of like Harry Potter isn't really a character, right? He's the bland guy who stands around while the more interesting characters are interesting, and he can be the hero and you can kind of project yourself onto him. I don't feel that's true of the lead in this movie. She's very specific. I
don't know if I entirely find that true of Harry Potter either, but I think that is going to be a whole other podcast. I mean, he lives in a cupboard under the stairs, like in London, in a very specific, in England, in a suburb of England, at a very specific time.
I think that usually they point to it. Well, anyway, because he's less interesting than Hermione and Ron Weasley. Anyway,
sure,
I'm going to stop there. Stop there.
It's fine.
And anyway,
but you're right. This also was like 2002, like when the movie opens, and I'm like, oh, this is like in a very specific time and place.
Yeah. And I felt like it was more like you attached to that character because of all the specifics than kind of going, oh, I could be this person. Although a lot of it, then you start finding out how much stuff is universal that the character's going through. I mean, I had a very uptight mother. All of it seemed very familiar. So it was, I heard what the guy was saying as far as like, well, if you're not from Toronto in 2002 and into boy bands, I don't know what you're going to get out of this. And I was like, well, or there's other options. The criticism of it as how dare a Disney product broach something like, girls needing pads. I mean, I have my opinions of it. You can probably hear it in the tone of my voice. I think that's probably all I need to say, but I don't know what was talked about at Pixar or your particular feelings, Ryan.
Oh, I don't know the conversations. I know they're just the way that the story process at Pixar works is that they iterate and iterate and iterate on the story. And to a degree that, maybe other animations, like when I worked at DreamWorks, they were also constantly iterating on the story until we were essentially finished with the production of the movie. So I know a lot of animated films now do this. I'm not sure that they did to the extent that Pixar's story team does on each of their movies, but it's very much like it has to be firing on all cylinders. They, at first they're just iterating, like the story team on the movie is iterating again and again, and then they show it to like the story trust, and the story trust will give their notes and their input. It's not like you have to take this, you have to address this note, but this is like, here's what we saw and where we think you could work on it and take it in a different direction. And then they will show it, to a test audience. And I don't think it filters out the moments of the film that are like bold or shocking or anything like that. Things like that can definitely stand. And because of like the story team, like even if they get some notes from the audience, we're like, oh, that was weird that the mom ate the bowel, Well, actually, I don't think we sort of tested the shorts, but that's an example of a bold kind of a shocking moment that we would like. The story team would go, no, that has to be in the movie. That's the story we're telling. So it's not like a movie by committee kind of a thing. It's very much empowering the storytellers to tell the story, but making sure that it's the best story that they can possibly tell by iterating on it and showing it to lots of people and getting notes and considering every bit of it. So, I don't think there's a reaction, maybe the size of the reaction to certain things can be surprising, but I'm sure they're not surprised at, exactly what some of the feedback is. I mentioned this to you, Ryan. There's a article on Vox.com that I thought was useful for me in thinking about this. It's called Pixar's Turning Red is an Unlikely Culture War Battleground, written by Aja Romano. And it does a good job, I think, of categorizing the different types of reactions to the movie that were sort of not like, I love it, but more like, and some of it was the sort of like the white film critic that said he couldn't relate to anything in the movie. That was one thing. And then another thing was more culturally conservative people shocked that they would even talk about pads. So, yeah.
I guess I'll just weigh in briefly.
Better not tell them about Judy Blume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a lot more out there. But yeah, I mean, this isn't, to me, I mean, obviously it is about a little bit of coming of age, or like, that place where you are coming into your own versus being in your family unit. But like, it's not like a puberty movie to me. I mean, it's not all about getting your period. So the fact that everyone sort of fixated on that, I think it's much more about like generational trauma and, parents and kids. And even if you don't have children, like you have some sort of relationship with your parent, even if that relationship is, I don't have a relationship with my parent. So I feel like there's so much universal in there.
Yeah,
but
that's good. The generational trauma is very much, sort of what it's about. Let me, before I forget, the third category of certain people not liking the movie was because of the showing a disobedient child, basically. Because May was sneaking out of her room.
To which I was like, what Disney movies have you ever seen where the child was like that? That just melted my brain. They were just looking for something to be grumpy about. I mean, you can't point to, from Snow White, you can't point to anything where the child was doing what the parent wanted. Like it was such a crazy
maybe
thing
Sleeping Beauty, but that wasn't like outright.
Yeah, I mean,
like defiance of parents.
But yeah, and I'm thinking about like Brave. I'm thinking, it's just like go down the list of Pixar movies of with the like more humanoid characters, and I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, they're part of Western storytelling so often is about going off on your own. And from Tangled to from Disney, but it was just an absolutely berserk, I thought. Anyway, I'm going to stop, get off my soapbox, let someone else crawl up on it.
Well, May doesn't really have an I want song because it's not a musical, but there is kind of an I want in the whole thing where it's like. And Laura, you kind of alluded to this as well, that it's not really so much a period movie or a puberty movie, but it is about like giving yourself a transition, right, and breaking free of what was coming before, and so it's basically a growing up thing. We've all been through that period in our lives, and so whether you're a girl who's into the boy bands or whether were a 14-year-old or 15-year-old like who wanted to buy the Jane's Addiction album, and your dad says, "Are you sure about this?" I mean, then or you hold up Iron Maiden's The Number of the Beast, and they say, "You're not really going to take this stuff seriously, are you?" So.
And I wasn't really into the boy bands thing. I sort of missed it both times with New Kids on the Block and then the 2000s. But I will say my youngest daughter, who's also 8, I wasn't playing it for her or anything. I did play it for her yesterday after she started singing it on her own in the car. Like the Four Town is very catchy.
It's
Billie Eilish and Phineas.
With the 8-year-old set, at least.
Mhm.
it felt totally real. That was, I mean, last night as I was like letting the credits roll, as I was like, after the movie finished, I was cleaning up and stuff and just let it roll. And I was like, my God, who wrote this? It sounds so completely of the
music?
time. Yeah.
Phineas, right?
Yes, Phineas and Billie Eilish. They're now Oscar winners for the James Bond song.
Oh my God.
They just won an Oscar.
He did a
They nailed
very
it.
good job. Or they both did.
And Phineas himself is one of the boys in the boy band. I'm not sure which one. But he's not Robert or Tae Young. It's maybe one of the Aarons, Aaron T or Aaron C or Jesse.
I also really appreciate there is 5 of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And 4 Town, but there's 5. I do have questions about how this movie was different for you from others that you've worked on. And you mentioned the anime influence
Yes.
and how I'm curious about how the anime influence, how you experienced that in the lighting. And
It's a big deal. Yeah, it was a big deal for Pixar and for Domi that she, and I think she started developing what she wanted her look to be. Well, I know she started doing this. She was developing it on Bao. There was a lot of experimentation at first on Bao with making very non-photorealistic style rendering, like sketch quality rendering for some of the stuff. Some interesting experiments were done, but we ended up going in a more realistic, realistic's not the word, but more using what our renderer is kind of built for, which is doing a lot of, it's a path tracing render. So it's built to do a lot of bounce lighting. So we're, doing, the bounce light of sun coming off the floor of the kitchen and illuminating the kitchen and the characters and things like that, as well as sort of, gaffing lights that we'll set up. But it really is sort of the anime style influence was more limited to, instead of the rendering, it was more like in the design of the characters and the design of the environments and things like that. There's that sort of the miniature, chunky, cute type of style. I know when we were working on Bao, we were not only looking at anime, but also these YouTube videos of these, they're mostly Japanese videos of people doing cooking, but on this super micro scale. So they'll like, you see these instruments and stuff, and the camera zoomed way into like this like dollhouse thing, but they're cooking like real like tempura shrimp, but like tiny pieces of tempura shrimp for dolls, I guess. But so that was kind of a part of it, this sort of almost miniaturized look to things. The textures on things would be a little bit too big for if it were a realistic piece of furniture, So there was that. And then on Turning Red, they very much like took it to the next level of with like the backgrounds and things like that with the environments. We were doing these things with color, very much sort of in our compositing software, which is more of like a post-process. After the render, we would then start to sort of play with the colors and the shadows a bit more to give it sort of this. It almost looks like when you put your cameras, your phone cameras into like HDR mode, and it sort of lifts up the darks and brings down the bright spots, and sort of makes everything in this sort of mid-range, mid-rangey kind of thing, and you're more focused on like the colors and the shapes rather than, you know, wide contrast between light and dark. That was a big part of the style, as well as what we had experimented with, you know, bringing it forward, the sort of character designs and the character posing and things like that. That's super important for the animation team to hit those sort of manga style, you know, poses and mouth shapes and things like that, and eye shapes, as well as doing some of those moments where it sort of becomes, I'm not sure if I have the language, you know, to describe it, because I didn't actually work on any of the scenes, but like where May is worried that her mom's going to look under her bed, and the camera zooms into her and all the light drops out behind her and she gets this like spotlight on her face, and these enormous drops of sweat are like pouring down her face. You know, I love those sort of stylistic flights of fancy of like doing things much more sort of anime style, and stylized to show like May's mindset. And I love the little, like, don't look under your bed, don't look under your bed. And you're watching her eyes and she just goes, whoop, just for a moment. And she's like, what? And her mom's like, what's this under your bed? No!
That scene from finding the notebook to the horror of the mom slapping down. I mean, it's so good with the slow-mo of
yes,
boom. And the reaction to it was, I think, the fascinating thing to me, because I think in 9 out of 95% of movies, that would have been a break. That would have been a violent argument between child and parent. And that's not where this movie goes. And I found that absolutely fascinating both times I watched it. It's some really smart writing. I mean, it's everything. It tells you so much about what's going on between May and her mother, right? And where the future is going if she doesn't panda out, you know, for the rest of her life. But yeah, I thought that was an amazing scene.
Yeah.
And my God, your skin just crawls for May during that.
I know, it's very cringe. But
yeah, the violent argument comes later. That's the shock. There's the initial shock, and then then you know you're going to have your violent argument with your kid later on.
At that point in the movie, like, May is still sort of mommy's little girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she has to sort of grow out of that, and she's going to start like being a little bit more self-independent and
yeah, and I think that's the step most movies skip, is they don't show that growth of why. They kind of just want to fulfill the audience's need to see the hero stand up for themselves in that moment. And I think it's the first time I watched it and wasn't expecting it, was expecting the violent argument at that point. And when they got back to the car or whatever, and instead it's her looking at her mom and then like looking out at the road, I believe. And it's that you can, you know, there's no dialogue, but the wheels are turning for her, and it's incredibly well animated on her face as to what's going on. There's no question there. I'm sorry. I walked us right into a dead end. I love that.
No, I agree with you. It's very well done. And there's a lot of complexity. We sort of keep touching on this, but there's a lot of, there's just a lot of complexity in this movie altogether. There's no like black and white. It's all grays or little shades. Like you said, when you compress your lighting, see how I brought us back?
Ryan, I have a tech question actually about lighting and working on this movie and all the other things you do. I'm curious how this works, because I think back to the way animators would use live reference models for animating back in the day, and they would bring in somebody to come do the dance, and so they animate Snow White and doing a similar dance. Well, leaping decades into the future now, and when it comes to lighting scenes digitally, do you ever use things in real life? Do you ever set up almost even a miniature scene in real life with lighting to where you can, plan?
He froze for everybody else, right? Okay.
Yes.
Nathan, you got to the word plant and then you froze.
Or plan or plant.
Oh, he's still frozen.
Well, I think I know where he was going with that.
Okay.
We don't, at least in lighting, we don't have like actual sets. We do have, for our characters, we have maquettes. And I think that's more used for, just turning it around and see how the characters, before we build them in 3D, just get a sense of the volume of the character and what they're going to look like from profile view or flat on or 3/4. So we do still do the maquettes, at least for the lead characters. We have sculptors on staff at Pixar for that kind of a thing. I think actually in the past, there has been some of that. I recall seeing a set of like Carl's living room with lots of materials for Up, where they had created the whole set in miniature. But that's not a normal thing for us to do. We'll do a lot of experimentation in 3D, but not so much in real life. But going back to what you were saying about the rotoscoping techniques of yesteryear, where they would film an actor or a dancer doing something, and then they would have, essentially trace over it to have Snow White do the same thing. And probably the analog, there's sort of two things that are done in animation, sort of in that vein these days. Of course, you've got the A-list, or not A-list, just any kind of actors that have the motion capture suit and the ping pong balls and the dots on their face, and that's to do full performance capture of an actor. Pixar does that. I think they do it. It's pretty well on a small scale, I would say. There's a lot. It's going back. I think in Ratatouille, they had some insults for people who've done motion capture, who do motion capture instead of doing, animation by hand, which is a pure way to do it. I'm not so much in that camp. I worked for Image Movers Digital under Robert Zemeckis, and I've worked on motion capture, full performance captured movies. So, and I think Pixar has even moved beyond that too, from a position in the past of we would never do that, to for background characters and things like that, it's potentially easier to motion capture characters. But certainly our hero characters are all hand animated by an amazing team of animators. But the other thing is just reference videos, which are very commonly done among animators. To they'll usually themselves perform because they'll have the audio of the performance of the vocal performance of the actor beforehand, and they'll have a little clip of it, or maybe they'll have multiple shots in a row, and they'll film themselves on their phone or with a camera at work, just acting out the entire scene just themselves. And then they'll reference it, sometimes frame by frame, to see exactly, what the facial poses are, what they're doing with their hands, and use that as reference as they're animating things in the computer.
I find that fascinating just because like so much of, I mean, everything old is new again. Like I remember watching, I think it was Frank and Ollie, the documentary about some of the what was the 9 old men, Nathan, 5. Yeah. And they kept mirrors, on their drawing tables, and, they're flipping back and forth between keyframes that they're drawing, right. Nathan's making the faces on video, which no one will be able to enjoy, but we four.
It's too bad because they're great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But it was like, and you could see in the faces of the characters then that were, and to know it's like, well, they're not using a mirror, they're pulling out their iPhone and just doing the exact same.
Well, they use mirrors too, I should say that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think most animators will have a mirror by their desk as well for when they don't want to go the full, thing of like videotaping themselves.
I have one more question, unless, we're about, go ahead. Ryan Steens, are you?
I'm scratching my forehead.
Okay.
I had oak allergies today.
Oh no. I guess I'm curious. I have a daughter who's interested in animation. I'm curious, when you were young, did you think you're going to go into animation? Were you interested in animation then? And just sort of what has your journey been into doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. I didn't really, think about going into animation. So, I wasn't like, I didn't like have my foot set on it. Like I remember watching Disney films of like people drawing stuff, and drawing was, I did like 4 years of art in high school. So I was sort of like interested in art and things like that, but it wasn't so much like, oh, I want to do hand drawn animation, because that's what it was. When I was growing up, it was, and you had to draw it, it's, and the Star Animators, the Glenn Keanes and things like that were amazing sketch artists. And so those, some of my friends, they were their heroes, and certainly people in the animation department, those were their heroes. But I kind of got into film first, I guess, right? So I went to film school with Ryan and watched a bunch of movies, and like Stanley Kubrick was my hero as opposed to, Walt Disney or Glenn Keane. But yeah, and I think it was 95 while we were in the middle of film school. I always had that, like I said, I did a lot of art, and that was sort of, and the idea of animation, was always kind of there. I was very interested in sort of experimental animation, like Oscar Fischinger and things like that. And I did some of that in college, like sort of Oscar Fischinger light type of things, where I was syncing up my just like non-objective, very abstract type of shapes and forms and stuff moving around to classical music. That was sort of some of the stuff that I did when I was in film school, taking the sort of general animation classes. But around that time in 95, which is, I think, when we were in film 1, right? 95 was the year Toy Story came out. So that was the thing. And I had sort of known that, like, computer graphics looks really interesting. I was a huge fan growing up of Tron, the original Tron. So I was like, how, I just had no concept of what I was seeing, but I kind of knew it was like computer graphics and things like that. So it was always sort of kicking at the back of my head. And then Toy Story came out. It's like, oh, right. These are like fully cinematic feature films that are completely generated by computers. Again, computers was something that I was interested in too, and video games, and I had taken programming class in college as well. So sort of combining my love of film with my art background, with my technical background, it's like, okay, maybe getting into like CG is something that I should do. And when I graduated from college, it it was a question like, am I going to try to go into live action stuff, or am I going to go into like animation or digital animation? Because, that's seems to be what's up and coming. And I just happened to be like, I'm from Dallas originally. And when I was, after college, had graduated, was living with my parents, there was a company local in Dallas called DNA Productions that was starting to dabble and had done some digital animation with off-the-shelf software that had been on broadcast television. They did something for a Weird Al special, and they did something called Santa versus the Snowman, and they were working on a project that at the time it was Johnny Quasar that became Jimmy Neutron as we got closer to this project actually becoming a reality. So I just like squeezed my way into there and like just sort of did an internship because I didn't know anything and just read all the manuals of the software essentially and got myself up to speed enough to where they would like actually pay me to do some stuff. And just was lucky because the company just kind of took off from there. And we did the Jimmy Neutron movie, which is the first feature film that I worked on, and the TV show, and then followed up by the Ant Bully, the second feature film. And after that, I, went to London actually, but jumped around from company to company and finally ended up at Pixar with some of the people that I had worked on Jimmy Neutron with.
Amazing.
So coming full circle. So I also worked on a project called All of the Other Reindeer. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
It's the Drew Barrymore thing.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. Barrymore. Matt Groening was the executive producer and sort of got that project up and running along with Drew Barrymore. So that was fun. Again, I'm working currently with people that I worked with All of the Other Reindeer on in 99, I think is when it came out.
Love that.
Nathan, do you have anything? You guys actually wrote questions down, which I did not do. So I want to see you, Mr. Reporter, if you have any questions.
Sorry, I was unmuting there. No, I appreciate that, and I love hearing your story of how you got to where you were, Ryan, because I don't think I got to hear that the last time when we were talking about Soul. So that's fascinating, and I'm always curious how people find themselves where they are, and as again bringing it back to the parental aspect right now. As the father of a daughter and son, but a daughter who is a junior in high school and is still, as we speak to her often, not sure exactly what she wants to do, where she wants to go, et cetera, and is oftentimes worried about the future because, as we know, parents these days start talking to their children when they're in first grade practically about their careers and what they're going to do. It's great to hear your story and to know that even when you're in college and even as you go out, we're all figuring things out, and that you found a great place. So I'm excited for her to hear this. Is what I'm getting at.
Cool. Well, yeah, I was very. In a way, I was more specific than a lot of my peers, in that I was like, I'm going to work on movies, I'm going to work in film. And what it came down to was like, well, wait, what part?
What part?
What? And it's like, okay, that was where I needed to like think and specialize. And, animation versus live action is very different. For obvious reasons. But the sort of career path and what you do, you know, just sort of the day to day. And I didn't quite appreciate it at the time, although as I was doing animated projects in college versus live action problems, I did get sort of a taste of the difference, like, you know, being up super late at night on a film set while we're trying to get a shot and setting up lights and hoping that the actors deliver, and like, when can we go home? What time is it? And I'm hungry, and that kind of a thing, as opposed to just kind of sitting down and working mostly, you know, more solitary, you know, of like doing one thing at seated, you know, and I could get up and take a break and that kind of thing, but it's a lot of work, you know, and your hand gets tired and that kind of thing. So, like, and literally, like, we have to worry about repetitive stress injuries and stuff like that with computers, and find new ways to make sure that your ergonomics are not injuring yourself. But it is, you know, it's not a 9-to-5 job, but it is like a job, like that is like the everyday kind of job that I go in the morning and I come back at night, not when I'm working from home, but it is much more of like a regular job. But I don't know if, like, if you work in more of the VFX side of the industry, it is a little bit, it's less secure than like a big animation studio like Pixar. It's not like project to project, like you may go months without work. But yeah, VFX sort of is more that way, where, you know, it can be sort of feast or famine, and they'll lay people off more in cycles and things like that. With, well, we don't have any work right now, but in a couple of months we have this project coming through, so stick around. Don't leave
So
the
what you're saying is that,
country.
so what you're saying is that it's good to have that umbrella of Pixar / Disney above you, rather than, you know, working at the firm that is hired out to do things.
Yeah, I think definitely, just from a quality of life standpoint, and from, you know, just you know, keeping my sanity and being able to make mortgage payments and things like that, it's much better to be part of a big company like that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Laura, do you have any follow-ups?
No,
No?
I'm just, I'm, thank you so much for talking to us, and I'm
My
good.
pleasure.
Yeah. I thought this movie was, I mean, every movie that comes out of Pixar, I mean, it's been fantastic, but the current run, and I think these kind of turn to these personal stories has been, and I understand why there's a little, I mean, it's not Cars 2, right? I mean, it's, there's a lot more meat on the bone of the stories that I think are coming out. I think the stories were well crafted for, you know, previously always, but I get why Pixar is doing what it's doing. And I just really thoroughly enjoyed this one once again, from, you know, top to bottom. Incredibly well crafted. And, you know, just so much good stuff in it every minute of the film.
And I want to say that from a visual standpoint, the gag that consistently made me laugh every time it happened was when their eyes turned, you know, when they got excited over something,
And the cute eyes.
and the
yes.
manga, the cute manga eyes flashed. I laughed every single time it happened.
Yeah, that's great stuff. My friend Molly worked a lot on that, just sort of nailing what that was going to look like in 3D, because that is a lot of, you know, it's what live action cinematographers worry about a lot, and what we worry about a lot in animation is the eyes. You know, it's windows to the soul, and, you know, I've seen these sort of Paul Devevic, he's a researcher he has this sort of visualization of eye tracking of a movie with of like they show like where viewers of a movie are looking.
Wow.
When they're watching a movie, and they overlay it on top of the movie, and it's just it goes from like the eyes to some other stuff, back to the eyes, back to some other stuff, and you'll just see like these dots, and they all converge around the eyes of the character. It's so I know it's not just me. I know it's like everybody else. It's sort of your anchor is the eyes of the character.
Except for the one psychopath watching your movie.
Right. Yeah. Well, on second or third viewing, they're like looking at the back. I know I do. Like, but when I saw Turning Red, like the second time, I was mostly watching Abby, I think, who is amazingly hilarious in the movie. She's like, I get a kick out of her lines and stuff like that.
She is the one I most personally identify with.
Yeah.
So.
And she does the eye thing too. It's like when she's freaking out, like, you're so fluffy, like rubbing her face in the May's panda fur. So that Molly did a lot of that work on the eyes, and they did all sorts of variations of, we need 2 circles, we need 1 big circle with, and I think it's eventually 3 circles in a very specific sort of way, and they have a little like vibration that they do as well. So yeah.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much. And what is the next Pixar release, and are you on it?
I am. I was on it.
Oh, it's Buzz Lightyear.
It is. It's called Lightyear.
Right.
Starring Chris Evans as Buzz Lightyear, as the human Buzz Lightyear. Of course, he's not an actual human in live action. Like, we didn't actually get a camera and film Chris Evans, but there is a humanoid, a human character that is Buzz Lightyear. I think the pitch from Angus McLean, who is the former animator and he's the creator of this movie, Lightyear, and the director, he sort of told the story of like how, he saw the movie Star Wars when he was a kid, because he's exactly that age, and had his like Han Solo action figure from that time, and he's like, well, thinking with the Toy Story franchise of like, well, Andy has his Buzz Lightyear character. He's really excited about Buzz Lightyear. Where did Buzz Lightyear come from? Was it from a movie like Star Wars or something like that? Is he a character? So this is like that movie, that sort of Star Wars movie that would have spawned the character of Buzz Lightyear, that would make a kid like Andy want a toy. Now, it's not trying to line up like the time. It's not supposed to be like a movie from 1995 when Toy Story came out. It's not trying to be that specific. It's more of like a 2020s action sci-fi movie, but sort of a little bit origin story. I hesitate to say origin story, but it is kind of like this is the human Buzz Lightyear and how, what he's like in his, his own universe.
Well, I look forward to Twitter misunderstanding the movie and the million fan theories that will come
already
out.
Misunderstanding it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Twitter has a head start.
I think Chris Evans, when he first, he didn't give that spiel, but he like introduced the movie and was like, just to clear things up, Tim Allen is not the voice. Tim Allen's the voice of the toy. I'm the voice of human Buzz Lightyear. And I think I feel like he might have confused more people than before that tweet. But even though, I don't know, is it confusing to you, Ron?
It was not confusing to me at all what I was looking at, but I did see immediately on Twitter theories, which is always the thing that, as Laura well knows, makes me start to slow down and shrivel and die.
I don't know if you know this, but in Greece, they're dead the whole time.
I've heard that theory.
And we'll be here for the next 2 hours.
And when they drive away,
thank you for,
they're like going to heaven.
Yes.
At the end. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Apparently people couldn't wrap their head around the fact that the characters fly off in their car at the end. And so they had to take it all the way back. Yeah. I appreciate that Laura brought it to the table. I still find it hilarious, but yes, she did manage to tap into one of my big pet peeves. So, anyway, thank y'all so much for doing this evening. And we will reconvene when Lightyear is released. So
awesome.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so good talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You want it? I want it. Give me 1, 2, 3, 4. You wanted it, you went for it, and baby, you got it. I wanted it, I went for it, and baby, I did it on my own. Did it on my
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.